पंकज लगता है बहुत काम हो रहा है. Where are my AI startups?
Yeah, Shripati, I found you 10 great AI startups. I'm going to get it to you shortly.
Awesome. Never done over this project.
Done.
Some say AI is the next electricity. Some say AI is the next internet. But very interestingly, in the late 1940s or during the World War II, Alan Turing, the father of artificial intelligence, was working on the basics of the foundations of this particular technology. Very interestingly, he was using this technology to decipher Nazi codes which helped them win the war, right? So that is what AI is all about, and that's where it started. So we at Prime are super excited about the opportunity in AI, and today's podcast is all about that. Welcome to the Prime Venture Partners podcast. Today we have Shripati Acharya and Pankaj Agarwal, who are going to talk to us about the various opportunities and why entrepreneurs should definitely build in AI. So welcome to the podcast, gentlemen. And let's start off by talking about very basic stuff, right? So I'm just going to throw out words and you tell us what the definition is so that even a common person can understand what AI is all about, right? So let's get started and tell us, what is AI? What is this AI? Like everywhere we're just hearing about AI, right? Yeah, anybody can start.
Yeah. So AI is really the ability for machines to respond to our questions in a manner in which it is useful for us in a very, very, very abstract fashion, right? But perhaps the right way to look at it, because you quoted 1940s as a starting point, which is absolutely true. And AI also had several inventions and incarnations and then long periods of hibernations, right? Before the current golden age, one could say, of AI, right? So I feel that our interaction with the machine, and talking of Turing, the test of AI really was, the Turing test says that if you're interacting with a machine, if you can figure out if it is a machine or a human on the other side of it, right? That's really what the Turing test is. So I guess that's what AI really stands for, is machine responding to human prompts or human questions. And the level of the responses really indicates the quality of the AI.
Got it. So definitely sounds like a sci-fi movie, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's the base of most of these films. So what is Gen AI? Like you told us, what is AI? What is this Gen AI?
So Gen AI, think of it like if you give it a paragraph and you just have a lot of fill in the blanks in it, right? And you start like filling in those blanks with what the words ought to be, right? That is the generation part. Mm-hmm. So it's actually creating content to fill in. And what it is doing is that it is trained on a whole bunch of other stuff. And based on that, it is actually answering your questions. And the interesting thing and I guess the fascinating thing here is that the answer it is giving is not something which it has particularly learned. So until now, when we think of search, it is all retrieval based, which is if you're actually looking for saying, hey, I want to know a restaurant in Indranagar, right? What is the best restaurant? Where can I eat pizza or what have you? That information is in some database somewhere. It's out on the web. And Google is extremely fast at figuring out and giving you exactly that piece of information. And the paragraph will be actually something which somebody else has written. So it's a retrieval-based search, right? But when you ask that question to a generative AI model, when you're asking it of ChatGPT or any of the other models, it is creating an answer which is not anywhere in what it was trained on. And hence it's actually generating an answer. And that's why it's such a fascinating new epoch in AI.
Got it. I think so, Pankaj, you were recently talking about Perplexity, right? And like how that has replaced Google search for you. Yeah. And that is exactly your use case here. Yeah. So can you tell us about Perplexity and like how that is different from Google, right?
Yeah, I think, so as Shripati said, right? So Google has this crazy expertise on finding sort of links that will most likely help you answer whatever you're searching for, right? Either looking for an information or looking for a restaurant or something like that. But Gen AI generally and Perplexity specifically is structured around this philosophy that it will give you the answers and not like list the links on which you can potentially find those answers, right? So for example, I can go on Perplexity. In fact, I'm planning a Bali trip later in the year, and my starting point to plan that trip was I went on Perplexity and said, I have about 9 days. These are the 4 areas I would like to spend, suggest some things that I should be doing there, or what would an itinerary look like. And it, in a very super fast way, actually generated like a decent plan that gave me a starting point, and on which I'm actually building my trip on top of that, looking very similar to what it recommended, right? So yeah, fundamental differences rather than a retrieval based, right, which is kind of the search that Google kind of enables. Perplexity is of course learning from all of that, but it is generating answers to your specific queries, right, rather than giving you links for you to figure it out.
Got it. So what is machine learning, right? Like people keep saying AI, ML. So how do we understand what is AI, what is ML? So if that can be addressed.
So these are all like actually foundational technology. AI is a very generic term. Machine learning is actually what is leading to what we perceive as an AI from the entity which is actually trained, the output of that model, right? So machine learning really is taking a lot of data and then learning something based on that data, right? That's what machine learning is, and there are very different ways of learning from that particular data, and that is the stuff which has been evolving. So all the models, all the various algorithms, etc., come under the broad rubric of machine learning, which is the underlying, I guess, technology which is driving all of these things.
Got it. And like when we speak of MLs, right? Like also LLM is a very popular term. Like I keep hearing this. So what are LLMs?
Yeah, so LLMs, full form is large language models, right? And these are these massive models trained on crazy amounts of data to enable Gen AI, right? To enable generative AI, right? And of course, it's not just limited to text, although that has been sort of the mainstream so far with the launch of GPT a couple of years ago and the stuff that has happened. But it's sort of shifting multimodal, and you can generate not just text but images, videos, and so on and so forth, right? So LLMs are like the core component of a generative AI system. These are foundational models that are trained on, for example, GPT-4 was trained on 15 trillion tokens of data, right? And these LLMs have the ability to generate various kind of outputs, as I said, whether text or video or images, based on a natural language interface, right? So as a human, you could enter, right from, doing basic search of travel plan that I just talked about to like writing a code, right, for whatever application you're developing, right? So LLMs kind of power that, right? So Shripati touched upon models in ML. LLMs are a kind of models, right? But they are like so massive, so intelligent, they're able to do a lot of tasks in a very, very human-like way. Right?
Got it. And so you kind of spoke about GPTs a couple of times while you were explaining LLMs, right? And also tokens. So can you like give us a brief about GPT? What is GPT, right? The full form of it, how it operates, and what are tokens in this ecosystem?
So GPT is a kind of LLM, right? The whole research that enabled these large language models to sort of come about is based on this whole transformer architecture, right? There's a paper that was written, I think in 2015, 2016, which was around, I think, attention is all you need, if I remember the title of the topic, right? And tokens are nothing but combination of words, right? So 15 trillion tokens roughly would translate to about 20 trillion words or something like that, right? So, there's a fancy way to kind of look at or measure the quantity of data on which it is trained. But token is a combination of word or kind of a phrase which is used to train these models.
Got it. So I'm assuming like the current young folks, right? Maybe somebody who's in their 10th grade, 11th grade would ideally want to be somebody who's building AI in the future. That will be the most lucrative career, right? So what leads to this path of building AI, or who kind of becomes this proficient AI builder developer, right? Like if you can touch about that.
Before we get to that, actually, I think the Pankaj that chanced upon mentioned this paper, right? Attention is all you need, and it's very seminal in terms of like why this actually was a breakthrough in terms of how the machine learning systems were actually designed.
Right.
All right, and previously the work would be on. Okay, if you actually, there's this back in 2009 or so, there was this database of images called ImageNet, which was released by Stanford. And the idea here was that you'd have a bunch of cats and all, whatever it is, a bunch of images, and you had to correctly recognize the images. And so the machine learning algorithms were tested against that. It's around like 14, 15 million images in that database. And that was like the benchmark for it. And then as the algorithms got better and better and better, they got better and better at actually recognizing those images versus a human image, And now, of course, they're way shot past the accuracy of humans on that, right? So that is something which only happened about 10 years ago, the ability of algorithms to actually go back. And one of the contributing like seminal articles was this one which Pankaj mentioned. And the meaning of attention here is really that the words in a particular sentence, what they mean is related not just to the words which are coming just before it, which is really how algorithms were previously trained, but the context of that entire sentence. All right. And one example here is that just reading recently, which I liked, it said, the key to the cabinet is on the table. Right. So now the article is actually refers to the key, which is like standing somewhere behind in the sentence, right? So you need to be able to figure out who is referring to what. And so if you're actually able to take a large enough context, that's where the context window notion comes into the picture, right? So in this context, it's trying to correlate, like this is related to which word in the past, right? And so once you're able to do that properly, and you are able to say, well, this word is really related to that, and hence the weight of what comes after this. So it's more likely to say on the table versus something else, right? So the system just becomes better at it. And that's what the attention piece of it is. And so the algorithms around that turned out to be remarkably good, very surprisingly good in terms of their performance on ImageNet. And that's why I got all this attention going in on that. And then with large language models, the idea that how about let's just train it on like open text which is available on the net. And then finally, actually let the prompts be, instead of being some structured input, be just free form text, is what has actually created this revolution which we are sitting on right now. Right.
Got it.
So it's just important to understand that this sort of like has been built on a lot of work which had already been done. But some of these innovations towards the end actually just tipped it over the edge and made the mass adoption possible, because just we can relate to it so much. Because language is how we communicate with each other, and free form language is how we are now communicating with the systems.
Right. Okay, that's super interesting, right? Like, thanks for bringing that up. Would you like to address that particular question about who can eventually become this magnificent AI developer? Is it going to be enterprises largely leading the race? Right? Like, say, for example, you have somebody who's in their 11th, 12th grade. How do they go on to become the best AI developer in the future?
I think, that is the future, right? In fact, coincidentally, I was reading an article today about the best of the engineering schools in the country, that is in India, are kind of reshaping their computer science programs to focus on machine learning and AI, right? See, it is a field that I feel is going to be relevant for next 50 years, right? And to kind of put some numbers around it, right? The core component of playing with models, training them, fine tuning them, and so on and so forth, is the best kind of person or the job to do that is a job of an ML engineer or an ML researcher. Both these jobs profiles put together, we have less than 500,000 such people globally, right? Not just in India, like globally, right? And you can imagine, right now, the kind of excitement and action that is, that is happening already, that is going to happen over the next few years. You're going to need many people with those capabilities, right? So even if you are remotely, building an expertise in AI ML, you're going to be highly valuable in the job market, right? So computer science, if you can, I wish that every single 10th, 11th year old in the country today, if they could take computer science and become ML engineers, that would be fantastic. I think there would be more than enough for everybody to do.
Got it. So I think, that's like great context setting, right? So in the last couple of years, specifically about 2.5 years, something remarkable has happened. Like, would you like to start off from the last 2.5 years and tell us where it's gone and where it's possibly going, and where do you see it?
Yeah, maybe I can start. Would love to kind of see. So of course, and I think we touched upon it already, but last couple of years have seen or demonstrated the massive abilities that LLMs have kind of unlocked, right? Because of this natural language interface in which we can kind of interact with it, right? They have shown, remarkable success on generating human-like text on variety of topics, right? And of course, GPT-3 was sort of like the inflection point in the whole journey. But in less than 2 years, GPT amassed about 200 million users, generating a revenue of $1.5 billion. It's like holy grail of a consumer tech company, right? None of this has happened before, right? Even the biggest of the giants today, they were not making any revenue for many years, right? So GPT-4, OpenAI has kind of had that kind of impact, right? And it has obviously caused a lot of excitement to the extent that in just 2023, there were $50 billion that were venture investments that were put into AI. And actually, if you kind of look at the scale of investment since the launch of GPT-3, it's more than $100 billion, right? In just last couple of years, right? So the fact is that it has become a mainstream conversation. Consumers and enterprises alike are excited about it, will be affected by it, and you will see it getting kind of adopted everywhere, right? Tech companies or even non-tech companies will be deploying these models into their production use cases. Consumers will see a massive shift in the way you consume, create, and interact on the internet, and it's here to stay for as long as I can imagine it. Definitely in my lifetime, right? And a lot of things to be excited about, and it's opened up. Of course, with the shift comes a lot of areas, opportunities for the new entrants to kind of make their space, make a place for themselves, and that is the business we are in, and I'm definitely excited.
So it is really a massive revolution, I would say, as far as the technological advance is concerned. So just think about it from the resources required to do a startup. Okay, so if you're building a startup in late 90s, right? If you're doing Snapfish then, we actually had to store photos. A gigantic EMC machine actually sitting in our data center. We had our own machine in which we had our own storage. Okay, so that was what was required to actually do a really seriously scaled website. Then comes the whole notion of cloud, and the entire cost of hosting and running your own website and your machines just disappears. So now it's like sipping from a straw. You only go ahead and do your storage, and it goes magically somewhere in the cloud. You need more people, and hence you need more memory, and hence you need more compute. It magically shows up. You need more server instances of your web server to show up to actually handle the increased scale. Those get spun up. And all of this is happening magically in the cloud. So dramatically reduced. Right? And hence we had an explosion in startups. But then with AI and GPT, now the cost of actually doing complex programming and creating complex software is again dramatically reducing. So previously, if you had 100 people to do a startup, 1,000 people to do a large company, it shrunk down to 100. And I won't be surprised if it's now we are talking tens of people sized companies creating massive impact in terms of the kind of software which they are creating. That is what it is doing. Because in one sense, we have completely democratized creation with GPT. And creation includes not just creating software, which is everything, right? Everything runs on software, but it's also creating art, it's creating music, it's creating videos, it's creating marketing materials, it's synthesizing voice, all of these things. And now the scene as a result shifts on folks who are actually really understanding how to deliver the value proposition. Because how to deliver that value proposition can now be done with a very small number of resources. To underline Pankaj's point, if you are a kid going to college or graduating and you have an understanding of this entire discipline in computer science, of AI, of how to create products, you can do it with a very small number of people, very cost effectively, and deliver meaningful impact. So it's a very exciting time.
Very interesting, right? Like, so the largest of companies in terms of market cap could be possibly tens of people in the future, right? So that's massively interesting, right? And yeah, like you did speak about hundreds of billions of dollars being invested in startups. Like, could you kind of throw what kinds of startups have come up, like maybe like broad categories, what is definitely interesting and being seen in the ecosystem?
The whole tech stack is getting revisited, right? So we spoke about GPT and LLMs, but they're only one layer of the whole tech stack, right? Of course, they're the most important layer. In fact, that is the layer that has enabled the rest of it. But to make it useful for, let's say, businesses, for other applications to happen, there are other parts to that layer as well, right? So of course, there are various frameworks to look at it. The way Shripati and I look at it, and we kind of debated a lot about it, is that obviously there's a model layer, then there is a data layer, and then there is a deployment layer, right? Model, we have spoken a lot about, right? GPT-4, GPT is just one example. Of course, that was like the state of art, but now there is a state of art every week that is getting released, right? State of art model. There are right now about 1 million models that are hosted by Hugging Face, right? Which is like a repository and library for various models. Then there is a data layer, right? So the way to look at, of course, as Shripati touched upon earlier, you need this massive amount of data to train those base models, but unlikely that those base models by themselves will be relevant or will be useful for most of the, let's say, use cases, either for businesses or consumers alike, right? For example, while trip planning was one use case, right? And you could imagine the model can be trained to do better and better on that front. You could imagine sales could be a use case, right? So, of course, these models kind of do a decent job in broad set of domains, but to make it reliable, accurate in a particular domain, there's a lot of work that needs to happen, and solving for this data layer to fine tune, etc., will be needed. And the third is deployment layer, right? Which is once these models go into production, it creates other kind of challenges that need to be solved for, right? Because security vulnerabilities kind of open up. You need to think, unlike the traditional software development, these models are non-deterministic in nature. What that means is that Shripati and I might be asking the model the same question and it will throw different outputs, right? So all of these, of course, need to be figured to make it useful, right? So, of course, we can go deeper into all of these, right? But the point is that across, first of all, the stack itself is getting revisited. And within each layer of the stack, there are very specific problems or challenges that need to be solved to make it really surpass that whole excitement and make it useful and the transformation to kind of happen, right? And we're seeing actually excitement across all those layers, and interesting innovation, interesting startups come up across all those layers.
So got it. So what I'm understanding is there are three broad categories: model layer, data layer, and deployment layer, right? Like, so for example, if I'm interested in building a startup, I pick one of these categories, identify problems, and then kind of build and go. Is that what it is?
A good starting point, but we think, and Shripati would love to hear from him as well, that like it's so dynamic, so much action is happening. We think that, of course, you can find a starting point somewhere here, but eventually large companies, $100 billion companies we spoke about, will most likely operate at multiple of these layers, right? But yeah, would love to hear what you kind of have to say there.
Yeah, it's I agree with what Pankaj is saying here. Think of it as the three layers as an inverted pyramid. Yeah. There are going to be a small number of models at the bottom of this pyramid, right? It's an inverted pyramid, right? On top of it will be the middle layer of tools and a number of other things that are happening: data abstraction, data transformation, and all these tools which are there. And on top of that will be actually the applications. So obviously the applications will be the maximum number, right? And the way to think about it is similar to what is happening in the cloud, right? At the bottom there are a small number of chip providers to the cloud providers, right? The machines, the hardware. On top of it are the cloud providers, and we know there are only 3 or 4 of them, right? But the applications are like thousands and thousands of applications. So that's where the action, and at least from a VC lens, the investability, and from a startup lens, the opportunity will arise, will be on the application layer. But at the same time, just the layer below that, which is what we call a dev tools layer or the tooling layer, will also have a lot of opportunity, and really depends on the DNA of the founders on which area they want to operate in, principally because with a native AI look, you're fundamentally going to rethink the way you're building the product. This is not dissimilar to how we were taught about mobile first companies. So 2007, 8, whenever the iPhone first came out, right? It led to this whole generation of companies which were mobile first. All the stuff which was first, on the desktop, then a client server, then became a cloud-based, then had to become mobile first. And it required thinking, a new way of thinking. There are a lot of companies which evolved from there, and a lot of services you use today are all mobile-based, right? Uber and Swiggy and all these things, Airbnb, etc. Fundamentally, leverage your phone. So I feel that that's what's going to happen. So a lot of current software stack is going to get rebuilt. So you can be operating there in terms of rebuilding the software stack, or on the applications which are actually going to sit on top of that software stack, which didn't actually exist at all, and now you're able to you're now able to handle that.
For example, we talk about Instacart, which is like a $10 billion company now, but the previous avatar of Instacart was this company called Webvan, right, which went bust during .com bubble. It was exactly the same proposition, right? But why did it not work that time? Fundamental difference is the underlying tech and the kind of innovation that happened obviously changed the consumer behavior that kind of brought about the demand as well as supply, and I'll come to that in a moment. But also the advent of mobile and the cloud and everything kind of reshaped the cost structure to make it viable, right? Webvan was by design a desktop app, right? And while it could cater to the demand side of it, but to really get the supply sorted, you needed that delivery partner or whatever to have the mobile app, to have the location, to have the allocation algorithms, right? Which kind of enabled that. And there are like multiple such examples, right? So of course there could be fundamentally new applications that can be thought of in an AI native way, but a good thought exercise for some of these would-be entrepreneurs could be that, okay, what companies, and it's internet, all the information is out there, what business models and stuff just did not work, which could be redone with AI and can be made viable in from so many angles. Yeah.
That's very interesting.
They say, right, there are no bad ideas. It's only bad the timing, right? So many of the ideas which are probably not viable earlier could become viable now, just given the new landscape.
I think that's a very interesting insight for entrepreneurs, right? So just shifting gears a bit, right? So because you kind of listen to a bunch of pitches, and I'm sure in the past 2 years you've heard a lot of AI pitches. What are some things you're hearing, and what are they building in, right? Like maybe tips on that, like what are they building, what is not exciting, what is definitely exciting you and helps you move the needle. So I think both of you, right? That's be really helpful.
So you're saying what is it that we are excited about today, right? Yeah. In Gen AI. So very broadly taking a slice, right? There are direct to consumer B2C applications, and there are B2B kind of things. The way we look at it is that on B2C sides, actually more than building the applications, the acquisition of the customer is going to be has always been hard, is hard, will continue to be hard, right? Because getting the attention of the customer, getting them to actually go and use your consumer, rather I should say, getting the attention of the consumer, getting them to be users of your product, engaging them, retaining them, etc., are all tough problems. And hence, of course, the companies which are able to do that are able to command very high valuations. So while we can create a lot of very interesting, and we are seeing a lot of very interesting apps on the B2C side, what we cannot forget, it's not technology, but without a deep understanding of how to do cost-effective distribution, it's not going to be something which is viable, in our opinion. So when we are looking at B2C companies and interesting GenAI companies, the ones which we find the most interesting are the ones which have an insight, a non-obvious insight into how they are going to get distribution at scale. But when you look at B2B, it's very interesting because the enterprise is like, the spend on enterprise is something gargantuan, like 5 trillion. Like 5,000 billion is like the annual enterprise spend which occurs. And obviously, a slice of that is going to start moving into enterprise, into AI, slowly at first, and then at scale. As it's said of most seminal technologies, we overestimate the impact in the short term and underestimate in the long term, right? And it is something like that. We might think that the enterprise transformation is going to occur immediately. It won't, but over a longer term, it sure will, and the impact will be much larger. So the way we are seeing in our conversations with a lot of CIOs and CEOs in the enterprise space is that we need to understand how their issues with AI are. They all want to do something in AI. They understand it's a very transformative technology and hence they need to do something. However, they have a number of concerns and care abouts. One of which is that they, at this point of time, the landscape is changing very rapidly. Pankaj mentioned 1 million models in a Hugging Face, and more are getting added. You talked about LLMs, we're getting SLMs, small language models. Smaller and smaller models, which more or less actually for specific kind of problems, actually behave as good and sometimes better than the larger models, right? So there are all these model proliferation going on. There's open source, there's closed source, and so on and so forth. So enterprises are justifiably taking a wait-and-see approach on where they're going to put their bets. So they are not going to put their bets on one model, right? Which has a certain implication, which means that they are unlikely to start hosting their own models and start developing applications. They're much more comfortable probably with an architecture which enables them to switch and play with different models, right? That's one. The second thing is that they are very concerned about data privacy, specifically exfiltration of data, which is data from the enterprise going out of the enterprise. So if you are a startup and you actually say, hey, look, I'm going to help you create this new model. We'll fine-tune a model. Fine-tune is the process by which the model itself and the weights of the data in that model are changed with respect to the data which is fed into it, right? It actually, you're modifying the base model itself, right? That's fine-tuning. Is something which enterprises will fundamentally be uncomfortable with because you're sending the data out of the enterprise, which is not something which is going to work. If you just try doing it within their own cloud, it actually is going to be a lot easier to convince them to try out the product. The third thing they are concerned about is hallucinations, right? Hallucination is just a fancy word for saying incorrect output and somewhat random output. It's as if, the model got drunk and started saying stuff which it might regret, right? So obviously from that standpoint, if you have a customer-facing AI product, enterprises will be very careful with deploying such a thing because obviously customer-facing thing cannot have a lot of errors in it. What that means is that the things which they are going to be most comfortable with, where they are eager to deploy, is stuff in which there is a human in the loop. So that's why we see all these co-pilots and such taking a lot of adoption. So in a software co-pilot, it's an assistant. It's sort of like an autocomplete. You're writing code, it fills it up, it helps you write one simple function very quickly, etc., etc. But no problem if it makes a mistake. You as a programmer are going to fix it. Or you are a creative. You're writing a blog or you're creating a picture. Something comes in, you like it, you don't like it, you change it a little bit, you take some help, you add something in. So human in the loop, right? It's there. But at the same time, they do know that they need to do something. There's a lot of pressure from their own boards to say, well, what are we doing about GenAI? Just imagine a CIO, this is a meeting conversation which is happening in every board. What are we doing? We obviously cannot be sitting ducks and just waiting there. As a result, there are tons and tons of pilots. And we think that the next 12 months or so, at least 2024, will be a year of pilots for enterprise. But production deployments will come, and they'll come, in 2025, 2026, and so forth. So in this entire milieu, we feel that the folks who are actually actively experimenting within the enterprise are the developers. So what Pankaj and I are really looking to and talking to folks are what we really like are solutions which are catering to developers and helping them create these solutions, which are now a very fundamentally different way of creating it. Because as Pankaj mentioned earlier, the output is not deterministic. Previously, if you write a particular piece of code and you gave a certain input, you always got the same output. That's what determinism is. But non-determinism is a little bit like Bangalore traffic. You can go from here to Indiranagar in 15 minutes at midnight to like 2 hours at 7 p.m. and raining, right? It's become like that, right? So the same input gives all kinds of different outputs. So how do you now write applications in that case, test applications in that scenario, etc. will all have to change. So we feel that the opportunity on the enterprise side is large. In consumer side is also large, but it has distribution challenge. Enterprise side also has distribution challenges, but to a smaller extent. But the adoption, etc., has to be really thought through in terms of what is the insertion point for the particular product.
And insertion points, the point has to be, as Shripati said, developers, right? And the reason enterprises, as he said, the key set of people or personas in enterprises that are excited about it are developers, right? Whether it is from their own interest or whether the CEO is kind of throwing the problem at them. So, there's like a massive opportunity in the whole developer tooling layer to really help them navigate through this. And as I said, by the way, right, all this fine tuning, new model development, doing some of this advanced stuff, less than 500,000 people globally can do that, right? But you have 30 million of these developers that would be doing like a large portion of application layer development and stuff like that. And how do you solve for them to be able to develop an AI is a very massive opportunity.
Okay, so this was super informative and great, right? Like, so what are some parting thoughts both of you have?
So maybe I will say a couple of pitfalls I see in many of the pitches which we see. Perhaps I can share that to avoid here is think about what is the level of value add you're doing on top of the underlying models when you're actually creating the product or the application. And what we want to avoid as an entrepreneur is making too thin a layer, because obviously a layer on top of GPT can be very useful. But at the same time, as GPT itself adds more features into it, those layers can get absorbed into it, and suddenly the startup doesn't become relevant. That's one part. The second thing is that as a founder, you have to also think, what will the landscape look 5 years from now? And 5 years from now, we can be sitting at GPT-7 or GPT-8. I don't know how quickly the models are released. And we can safely expect them to be at least 10x better than today's models. Better, just define how better is better in terms of accuracy, speed, cost, ability to, and size, and being on the edge, and so on and so forth. So whatever product is being created and the value which is being added on top of the foundational models has to be relevant even then. So this thought process is very important, because otherwise what is getting good adoption today might just disappear 12 to 18 months from now when the next version of GPT comes along. So the way to think about it is that ideally the product or service is such which actually benefits from a better foundation model. And the better the foundation model, the more exciting that service becomes than something which actually gets subsumed by that or becomes less relevant. So I would say that's probably my top thought.
Got it. So for founders, definitely think 5 years from now, so that you're staying relevant to the models then and not necessarily built for like the right now.
Just imagine that the current model was 10x better. How good or how important what you're building would be in that scenario. And if the answer is it becomes even more relevant than it is today, then you're on the right path.
Got it. I think that's super valuable for founders. Yeah. Pankaj, you have something to add?
Yeah, I think I'd like to add, there's Devin demo came about, right, which was like AI software developer, right, and there was this hue and cry about, are software developers going to be relevant, right? You hear that, are these knowledge workers going to be relevant, right? But the way I think about it is really, and I think Benedict Evans kind of got me introduced to that, but there is this whole concept of Jevons paradox, right? So it's a economic theory which states that as technology reduces costs and increases efficiency, the overall demand, goes up because of the fall in cost per unit, right? And I think the best way to look at it is, I don't know how familiar our audience would be, but in like late 70s, like precursor to Excel was VisiCal, right? Which was like a spreadsheet software. And, the business model that, an iBanker is able to develop today on an Excel in a day, it used to take an army of finance and accounting folks in a month to be able to develop that, right? And when Excel came about, thinking that, okay, accountants will be made irrelevant, they'll be replaced. But I found this interesting chart, and I don't know if we can put it up in our show notes, but the demand of accountants has never been higher than since 1970. It has gone up like crazy, right? So that's the thing with AI as well. Of course, it will make a lot of things more efficient. I do think that knowledge-based work will be made more efficient. The cost per unit will be drastically reduced, but that will result in massive increase in demand, right? You have, as I said, 30 million software developers. Now, if you can make them more productive, more efficient, the use cases which were previously cost prohibitive to be digitized will come within the purview, and you'll be able to tackle that and kind of address that with this increase, this thing, right? So I don't think anybody is getting irrelevant anymore. AI, like any other technology, will likely have both the sides to it. We have to hope it's kind of the positives of it outweighs the negative, and we are very excited that it's going to be the way. Nothing to be scared about in my view, right? You just have to, I think, as a professional, as a mid-career person or wherever you are in your journey, the best you can do or you should do is make yourself or upskill yourself, keep yourself relevant as AI takes over. I don't think anybody is getting replaced as such.
So my big takeaway is learn, unlearn, and relearn, right? And AI is not replacing humans. So do use this podcast as informative material so that you kind of upskill a little bit. And so the opportunity in AI is massive. So that's the big takeaway. So we would look forward to hearing any pitches from any of the opportunities. We are excited about AI at Prime. So do reach out. And yeah, that's about it today. Thank you, Shripati. Thank you, Pankaj. It was a great session. Yeah. Thanks, folks.
Dear listeners, thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast app for free, and you'll be the first one to know when new episodes are available. Just search for Prime Venture Partners podcast in Apple Podcast, Spotify, Castbox, or however you get your podcasts. Then hit subscribe. And if you have enjoyed the show, we would be really grateful if you leave us a review on Apple Podcast. To read the full transcript, find the link in the show notes.